Morning, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the show called Handing the Shame Back. I'm delighted to be able to bring this channel to you, and this is dedicated to all the fellow survivors of child sexual abuse out there in New Zealand and across the world. The aim of this is to share our stories with you so that you don't feel so alone. And underneath the show notes, I will have some information for you so that you can get help as you need to. And I think one of the things that really interests me is being able to say, as we speak, we are handing the shame back. So I'm delighted to welcome very first guest on the show, Todd Portsmouth, who has been a hero in my opinion, because when he had the opportunity to talk about his story and share it with the world, it was through a court setting. And good on you, Todd, because he chose not to have his voice remain silent or anonymous. So welcome to the show, Todd. It's so wonderful that you're here.
Thanks for having me. It's a real privilege.
Awesome. So I guess as we launch in, I'm just wanting to check in with you. Our audience out there won't know perhaps a lot about you. So I'm just wondering if it's possible, Todd, to tell us a little bit of your story. What's led you to this today?
No, good as. So I guess currently I'm 44-year-old New Zealand male. I was brought up a small town relationships and married and got divorced and remarried. So I had my mother in my life, obviously. I had my birth father that we had to go to court-ordered visitations with him in the school holidays and things like that. And I had my stepfather, and obviously that side that I ended up living with from the age of mum remarried when I was like 4 years of age. So, and that's kind of where it all kicked off for me. From the age of 4 through to 15, I was sexually abused by my birth father, 2 of my birth father's mates, and 2 of his female partners, but also my stepfather. So nowhere for me was safe as a kid growing up. I struggled big time. A lot of it was sexual orientated, but then there was also a lot of physical violence involved in there as well. There was a lot of beatings. There was a lot of threats made that, if I told anyone, then they'd kill my sister. So my sister's a year older than me, and we used to have to go to my birth father's together for visitations. And so that threat was real, like I'd already seen what they did to me in terms of the hidings and things. And I guess for me is, I couldn't understand why no one would help me, why no one would step in and do something. So nowhere was safe. I wasn't safe at my birth father's. I wasn't safe at home. Nighttime was a massive struggle. I really had a massive fear of the dark, which is really ironic because now I'm a farmer and I'm up in the dark of the morning to milk the cows and things. So I've kind of got over that fear a little bit now, but it's still something that's real for me with certain triggers. I guess it's like anything, you become skilled at dealing with what you're handed, I guess, or you don't survive it. And I guess that's for me is, I don't like the word victim. I know that I was, but I prefer to see myself as a survivor because I kind of work on the theory that I've got through this and I've got to where I've got by working hard and by not ever allowing them to dictate as to who I would become,
Yeah.
and I guess my strive to be better than what was done to me has got me where I am today. And, it turned me into an absolute workaholic. Work became my out. That became my one thing where I was safe. And so as young as 9, 10 years old, I was out doing paper runs and milk runs. And then I'd do runs on a milk truck. So to try and avoid being at home, I worked. And then school holidays, I'd be working on farms and things just to limit how often I was at home or had to go to my father's. And that was an awesome avoidance technique that has led me to be really hard worker now, that I have to try and every day to try and figure out my work-life balance, because otherwise I'll just keep working. Because that is the one thing that's got me to where I am today. So I guess leading on to what happened, I went to the police 6 years ago and underwent 2 8-hour police video interviews. And then nothing really happened, to be fair. I remember being pretty distraught after going through that each time, and a feeling of pretty much helplessness and alone, that, that's it. I've done this part, and now it's just sit and wait, and nothing really happened. So that became incredibly hard in that aspect, I suppose. But I suppose before 2015, I was share milking quite a large farm, 1,500 cows in Rangiora down here in Canterbury. And I'd had a cow that had popped their hip out, and I had to put this cow down. So it was quite late at night by the time I'd sort of got everything done, and then got to her to discover what had gone on, that, there was no coming back. And so I got my rifle, and I'd been an avid hunter for years, and I shot this cow, and all of a sudden I remember being on my knees, bawling my eyes out, and I hadn't cried. I was 36 years of age, and I'd never cried before in my life, and here I am bawling my eyes out. And I guess it was one of those things that from that point on, the flashback sort of really kicked in, and I didn't know that that's what they were called at the time. I thought I was going absolutely nuts. They were just like videos playing in my head, and it brought back a memory of discovering a friend when I was at school who'd taken his life with a shotgun, and then it led on to the stuff that had happened with my father and his friends and partners and things, and it just was continuous. And at that point I was working 20, 22 hours a day. I just had to keep working just to try and shut this out, and I wasn't able to sleep. And I ended up going to the doctor, and was described as having severe depression and severe anxiety and PTSD, severe PTSD, which was awesome, but it didn't tell me anything. It didn't say, well, this is how we fix this or anything. So I actually tried taking my own life in October of that same year, and sort of life had spiraled quite considerably, I guess, to get to that point, and I just couldn't continue. I didn't want to live anymore, and then at the sort of same time, it culminated with my now ex-wife admitting to an affair with my worker, and her leaving the farm with the kids, and obviously my worker disappeared as well. So I was left short-staffed and running a 1,500 cow farm while dealing with these flashbacks and PTSD and things. And so I back to the doctors and things I went in. I guess that was the turning point for me, was how much more am I going to lose before I actually step up and confront this fear. And that fear, that big fear, I guess, stem back from being a kid, that if I tell anyone, they're going to kill me or they're going to kill my sister. And that was what had held me back all these years. And I was at a point where actually I didn't care. They could come and kill me because at that point I had nothing left to live without. That's what got me to talk to the police, I suppose. And from that point, you know, like that in itself was one poignant moment in my life that I remember as being so freeing that finally I was able to get these words out of my mouth and say, this is what has gone on. And I remember, you know, extended family members and that saying, you know, we wish we'd have known. We didn't know. And I remember just being shocked, going, how could you not know? Like, how could you not pick up on these things that's not right, you know? But no one did. Doctors didn't, you know, like I got stabbed by my own mother in my thumb, where I ended up stitching my own thumb up. Black eyes and bruises and things, and making up stories that had walked into a door handle and just dumb stuff like that to sort of cover up so no one could say that I'd told them that this is what had happened because they'd do something to my sister, you know. And that was probably, for me, being able to say those words and know that, you know, my sister was in a good place and she was safe where she was. And I'm okay, you know, I'm okay with it now. And you got to remember through all that, when this stuff's happening to you and is ingrained in you as young as 4 right through, that stays with you. And these people were, I remember them being big, you know, they were big, strong men. The women weren't little women either. The fear that I had was based on, and once I sort of got to realise that, I felt a lot more secure and safe within myself. So
you've raised
I guess that's where I'm
interest. Yeah, you've raised some really interesting things, Todd, and good on you, because in the speaking of this and the recounting of this, although it will trigger us because that's what happens, the good news is we understand what that is now, and we understand how the trauma still sits with us. The body never forgets, does it? So,
no.
But, you know,
No.
Thinking about you not being able to tell anyone, or the fact that no one could see what was happening, I totally understand what you're saying. And I guess my thing is this: if you put a child and an adult in front of concerned people, guess who the adult or the concerned people will always believe? It's never going to be the child.
It's not going to be the child. No, it's not. And that's the sad reality of it is, you know, like, I guess as adults, our purpose on here is to keep our young people safe and to keep them protected. I'm sure anyone who's been a victim of this type of thing before, as adults, I guess we become more hypervigilant around that sort of stuff. We pick up on things a lot easier than a lot of people. And, you know, like my wife jokes with me all the time that I'm Mr. Neighborhood Watch, because I just notice everything that's going on around me. Right down to, like, if we go to a school event or a meeting, I always know where the exits are, and I never sit with my back to them as such. I'll always position myself that I know how to get out of that room. And she asked me, like, why are you so particular about where we sit and stuff? And I said, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it. And it wasn't until working through that I realised, actually, I do this, and this is why I do this. And it's, I guess that's the key to it, I suppose, is the more people talk about this sort of stuff, the more people are going to be vigilant around it and realise these are the triggers. You know, like, as kids, we're manipulated, we're coerced into ways of things that it becomes normal because it's happening so regularly to
Yes.
such a little mind that mind
Yeah.
hasn't worked out that, hey, this is wrong, this is bad, until when it is, the fear that's there, you're already a prisoner of your own self because it's already happened, and you know that you start believing the lies you're told that no adult is going to believe you. And
No,
sadly, a lot of adults don't believe a kid that says something. And
no,
whereas if they're picked up on that much sooner, that's years of trauma that a child or young person could be saved to not have to go through and endure. So when they become adults, they're not as hurt. Hurt people. And if we pick up on this stuff sooner, it's not going to have as big an effect on them as an adult later on. There's a lot of sick, twisted people out there that have no shame and no fear of hurting children and doing this sort of thing.
no. And I think there's quite a large number in our society, because when you consider it, the police that I have been speaking to tell me the numbers are as high as 1 in 3, and I'm talking girls as well and boys, and the reality is, Todd, we all know people, but for every survivor like us out there, we have to account for there's a certain amount of abusers out there, and those numbers aren't getting smaller.
No, they're not. And 1 in 3, just to reiterate that, 1 in 3 is huge, isn't it?
Yep. 1 in 3
look,
survivors.
I know many people that have been abused. I've experienced it even with my own daughters, in terms of as teenagers, or young adults going into the wide world and finding themselves in situations that things happen that, people aren't adhering to no means no. And, and they're very aware of what's going on with me, and they're quite vigilant around that sort of thing themselves, I suppose, would be the word to use. Yet they've experienced it to some degrees. And as a parent who is so anti this stuff, it is one of the hardest things to deal with, because especially as a dad, I know what I wanted to do, and
Yes.
but I had to make sure that we did it by the book, and then, but they've still gone through that, they've still had to endure that, and that's not right. That's nobody should be subjected to that.
No.
But 1 in 3, is huge.
That's huge. And that's just one report. Look, there's many that are a lot more conservative, but you and I both know there's a lot of us out there, and we need to kind of have more of a community where there's support for fellow survivors, because we know exactly what we're talking about when we say, oh, I had a horrible flashback the other day and I couldn't relax after that. Or I saw someone coming towards me and it just reminded me of, my father or my uncle, or, and those sorts of things. They're specific things that occur that fellow survivors, we just get like that, because we understand, we've been through. And I just love to see more support for our fellow survivors out there, because you know what we all have in common? We're brave. We've found the courage to survive this. So, Todd, one question to you. What do you think has helped you? What's helped you once you recognise what had happened?
I guess, look, it's actually, I underwent a lot of therapy. So I guess this will sound really stupid, but it's actually talking about it is the one key thing I think that has helped me the most. I don't want people to treat me any different or special, or wrap me in cotton wool, because that's not who I am. Some people, definitely, that's what they need to get through this, but I'm not that person. I'm an ace is an ace, a spade's a spade. I'll tell it how it is. I'm certainly watching my language for this podcast. Because I'd use a lot stronger.
Say whatever you like.
I would use a lot stronger language in regards to a lot of it. But I guess for me, it's been talking about it. It's like just what you touched on a couple of minutes ago is about being triggered in flashbacks and things like that. That is one of the most incredibly tough things to get through. And just when you think you've got it all sorted and actually I'm on control of this, boom, you will get slapped silly and it'll hit you again. And you're like, what? I thought I dealt with this.
Yes.
And it's little things, it can be just a smell, a certain touch or a noise can just trigger you and then boom, the flashbacks will begin again.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, working through it was talking to fellow survivors. Tamara was huge for me because she was probably the first person I talked to that got it, who has been through it herself. And then there's the likes of yourself and your own story, which, man, is incredible anyway. And all of a sudden you start realizing, hey, I'm not alone here. Like, I'm not the only person this has happened to. And if these people can get through it, so can I. And it's not easy. That's the first thing I'll say is it's not easy. It's one of the toughest battles you'll face. But I would encourage anyone out there that this has happened to, just to talk. You don't have to go to the police as such, but to start talking, start sharing that this has happened, because when we find our voice, and we use our voice, we take the power away from the people that did these things to us, and we hand all that power back to ourselves all of a sudden. Because this is the thing, when you're abused sexually or even with sexual violence, the fear that is created in that is designed to silence us. It's designed to take away our voice. And it's the one thing, if we use our voice, they can't stop it. They can't do anything. And they don't want us using our voice, because by doing that, it outs them. And
yes.
I guess to answer your question, to me, that has honestly been actually opening my mouth and getting these words out, because by doing that, not only has it helped me, but it's helped others, and look, as a male, we don't talk enough anyway. Men generally deal with things internally, and we don't generally go around and just say, oh, look, this is what happened to me. And I get it, look, I felt like I'd lost a lot of my masculinity. I really struggled with who I was, who am I? And how do I live in this world that's dominated, that men are meant to be strong and tough and not scared of anything? And man, I was scared of the dark, and the dark, like it's nothing. It's just empty blackness. But I was absolutely freaked of it because of what had happened in the dark.
Yes.
That's why, for me, talking brings it out into the light. It is out there where it's dealt with, and people can take it as it is. That answer your question? I hope so.
That's so powerful, and thank you so much, because I think for some of our audience out there, they're potentially struggling to come to terms with what's happened to them at all, let alone finding the courage to speak. And I totally agree with you. I think it doesn't have to be a therapist to start with. It can be a best mate. It can be a neighbour. It's just getting the words out. And I think that does take some of the pressure and the weight off. The interesting thing is, of course, and I realise this has been your experience as well, is that sometimes, Todd, people don't want to talk about this. No. And I don't mean fellow survivors, I mean people that you speak to. So I asked a buddy of mine, Scott, one day and said, Scott, why do people want me to shut up about child sexual abuse? And he said, gee, it's because they're uncomfortable.
Yep.
But you know what, Todd? Being uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not happening.
No, and this is the thing is, you know, for people to be able to talk, I mean, I'd encourage those out there who might listen to this or watch this video. If you have a friend or a family member or just anyone who says, you know, this is what's occurred to me, you don't have to know the words to say. You don't have to do anything. Just listen. Just listen and be there for them, because that's one of the most incredibly hard things is getting those words out. And when they start coming out, they generally don't want to stop. And
Yeah.
you're going to see a lot of emotion, you know, you're
Yeah.
going to see a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of anger and frustration. And you don't have to know how to fix that. You don't have to be able to do anything except just be there for them and let them get it out, because it's one of the hardest things to do. And, you know, it certainly for me was, you know, it wasn't a therapist, it wasn't the police that I actually said it to first. It was just it was actually my ex-wife that I told it to. And I just had to get the words out. And I think that was the thing, was the end of my marriage, I guess, was the guilt that here's me sharing my heart story after being with her so long as to this is what really went on. To 2 days later, her walking out the door, I think the guilt of what she was up to was too much for her. But it didn't matter. Like, it still doesn't matter to me. I'm just glad I managed to tell somebody, because from that point, you couldn't shut me up. And I wasn't going to be silent. I know, right? I wasn't, but I wasn't going to be silenced about it. No. And it's something that, you know, we all experience that uncomfortableness that people face when we talk about it. You know, and I have a different twist on that slightly. Is I think people become very uncomfortable about it. You know, like, so for me, sharing my story, like, my kids know some of what has occurred to me. They don't know everything. And I keep, you know, that was one of the hardest things ever, is explaining to your children, hey, this is what's happened to me. Because there's actually no help out there for that. There's nothing online as to how to explain this to your kids. There is no one out there who really can offer any advice on it. There's one area I want to see change in is hugely in that, because I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of people out there that have to explain this to their kids.
Yes.
But touching on your thing in terms of uncomfortable, so my son, who's 22 now, 23 actually, explaining to him, man, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know whether to look at me. He was so uncomfortable. And look, I don't blame him for that. No one wants to hear that about their dad or whatever. And that was still not going into details. It was just, this is a subject he didn't want to know about, because he knows it's bad. Anything to do with that is bad, and we don't go near that. Whereas I'm like, actually, no, you know, let's talk about this and let's make it normal, because if we make that normal, that conversation normal, it takes away that silence stigma as well.
Yeah, yep. I agree with you, and I think there's a difference, and I love what you've said, that, you know, Todd, and maybe it's something you'll eventually do, or we can look at together, but providing some resource online for people like ourselves who have adult children. How do we tell them? How do we get those words out and keep them safe as well, you know, in the telling? The uncomfortableness, so I'll park that with you, because that could be something that starts your mind going. But the other thing you raise, you know, when we talk about uncomfortable, I'm not talking about our loved ones. I'm talking about someone that you think might be safe to share this with, and they don't want to hear it. And it, to me, Todd, and I'll be interested in your perception of this, it makes me think, if they don't want to hear it, then that adds to the silence, which then helps the abusers keep perpetrating, which then adds to the shame that all the survivors feel, because they're getting it from people they're trying to tell who don't want to know, and people who perpetuate it and see how the cycle continues.
Yep,
That's my
100% agree.
concern. Yeah.
Yep, I absolutely agree that that's what you're saying. Smack on is it is. I mean, and it's hard to know that whether those same people that become uncomfortable around it and don't want to have that conversation, whether something similar has happened to them. You know, everyone's story is different too. You know, like there's hundreds of thousands of survivors out there that have been sexually abused, and not one of us is our story the same. You know, it is always different. There's a lot of similarities in what goes on, but the individual trauma is different in all of us. Yeah. And so therefore, you know, look, I don't know. I just know that I've had that conversation with a couple of people who weren't family members, they were just friends. And they became really uncomfortable about it. And both of those people have then ended up coming to me saying, man, I didn't want to listen to that. But you know what? This happened to me when I was a kid, and this happened, you know, and I got to be that ear sitting there listening to them. And that's why, for me, I guess talking about it is important, because that was what released it for them to be able to talk about it. Was here's someone talking to them saying, hey, this happened to me. Gave them enough courage to actually be able to say, you know, that made me so uncomfortable because this happened to me. And how cool is that? You know, like that actually gets them talking about it as well. And I sat in a room about 4 or 5 years ago, and there was 5 of us males in that room. 4 of us have been sexually abused. Now, no one knew that at the time, and that all came out in that room. And that was just through talking and sharing my story, a little bit of my story with these guys, that it eventually came out. And I was like, far out, you know, like, if this is just one group of guys and there's 4 out of the 5 of them saying that they've been abused, how many more are out there? You know, like when the figure is, I think for males, they bandy around 1 in 4, I think it is. Yeah. I think they'll be quite surprised as that figure will be a lot higher, because men in general don't go to the police. They don't talk about this, that this has happened to people. So that figure isn't truly known. And even in women, you know, 1 in 3 women or females that have been abused, that figure in them is probably a lot higher as well, because there'll be women who don't say anything to anyone and they don't let on that this has happened.
It's interesting, because I was watching a documentary the other day, and it's really, I totally agree with what you were saying. Actually, we don't know, because it's the silent endemic, isn't it? It's silence. It's what keeps us quiet. Silence, shame, secrecy. Shame will always win, as we know. But I was watching a documentary the other day with, and it was Professor Loftus, and Professor Loftus is the queen of repressed memories syndrome and don't believe what your memory tells you. And she's done actually a great deal of harm to us and fellow survivors out there, because what she's done is basically said, any memory you have that isn't, that you had repressed, for instance, I repressed for 16 years, okay, therefore it can't be true. And so the damage that does, meaning that other survivors out there, like ourselves, Todd, we then get named and shamed and made to feel even worse, because it can't possibly be true. Now, the people who have invested in that are actually people who either have something to hide, or I've found out recently that she was also a victim of child sexual abuse. Shock, horror.
Yeah.
But the damage that has been done to so many fellow survivors out there, because this repressed memory syndrome that happened. And I know when I had my police researching all of my story, my family used that against me, that whole repressed memory. And so the police were really struggling back then to come up with what was true and what wasn't. But I guess that leads me into a question for you. So I realise recently you've had a court case. Are you able to share a little bit about what happened during that period of time for you?
Yeah, um, so obviously after the police interviews, they were doing the investigations. The caseloads, because it's historic, it gets put on the back burner and they deal with current stuff first. So depending how busy they are, depends how much work they get done. And anyway, my case had sort of stagnated until it reached the hands of a certain, I call her detective, but she's a constable detective type thing. Not entirely sure, but Alana anyway. She was hugely instrumental. I got nothing but praise for her and the work she did. I was emotional to talk about this. She actually arrested my father. She was really awesome. Communication with her was huge. So prior to that, the detective prior to her had said to me, "Oh, look, you might need to let your employers know that, you know, we're close to making an arrest and this will happen quite quickly. So it's best you make them aware." And I was okay. And I'd actually just moved from Tai Happy, where I was stock managing a big place there, to Amberley. And I'd only been at the job 2 weeks and I was like, rightio. So I plucked up the courage to tell the owner that, you know, this is going to court and this is what's happened. And he terminated my contract under 90 days because he didn't want any involvement with it. I was like, okay, that's how you want to be. I don't think you're me to be working. I don't know what he was afraid of or what he was scared of. So that led me to where I am now, who I have a really supportive owner, boss here. And it's like, mate, you know, if you got to go, you just go. If it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you do what's right for you. And I was like, cool as. As it turned out, COVID affected us, so it didn't make it to court. It got put off another year and another year. So each time, you know, it finally got to that point, nothing happened. But anyway, Alana arrested my father, and that was one thing she said to me, was that was the important thing for her, is she wanted to be the one that put the cuffs on him, and she wanted to follow it through. She wasn't going to let that case go because she'd seen from the police's point of view how let down I'd been by the fact that it had gone through so many hands to get to hers, that when we got to that stage, she wanted to be there. So anyway, we went to court, and it was all set down for trial. And then 3 days before it went to trial, my father changed his not guilty pleas to guilty. But part of that deal was that it was only off of a couple of the charges in relation to one incident. And the reason behind that came out afterwards, which I had a sneaky suspicion that's what it was. But the reality is he was on 20-something charges. 15 of those carried the maximum penalty, I think, which was 15 years from back in those days. Because back when this happened to me, there was no such charge as sexual violation of a male. It was called something completely different. But anyway, my father had already spent time in prison as a convicted pedophile for other people he'd committed these same crimes to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is where my story is probably a little bit interesting. So part of that course, part of that sentence was for him to get out. So he got sentenced to preventative detention. So the only way he could get out of prison was he had to complete this course, Waimarama course in Christchurch, where part of that is you've got to admit to the crimes you've committed. So for these crimes he'd committed prior, he'd pled not guilty and was found guilty on all these charges. He'd denied it the whole way through that he was being set up and, you know, he'd never done these things, to then he did this course and he'd admitted to, yes, he did do these things to these people. This is, I guess, my one golden moment. was he was an absolute dumbass, and he admitted to what he'd done to me. Not all of it, but some of it. What he didn't realise is that meeting, it's all recorded. Part of that, my auntie then contacted me asking if I would allow my father to have contact with me, because he'd done this course and rah-de-rah-de-rah, and I was like, no, well, this isn't happening. And part of her email, she had stated in there that she'd been at this meeting, and this is what he has gone on to admit. So I already knew I had a witness to this, that he has said this in front of someone. The police hadn't really done much about that until I said to them, hey, he did this course. Here's the email. I've still kept it all these years where he's admitted this. I forwarded that on, and they went back, and sure enough, they got from corrections, they got his statement. So he had to, going through that, is any evidence that the Crown had. So that's not my lawyer. You don't have your own lawyer. It is a Crown lawyer who takes the case on behalf of the Crown. They're not taking it on behalf of you. They're not there to protect you or do anything like that. They are there basically to get a conviction. That's their job. But anyway, they took it, and they have to then disclose any evidence they have to the defence. And the minute that they saw that, they changed their deal to a plea deal. Now, I wasn't even aware that he could change his plea to guilty before trial. So we were flown to Wellington. I'm down in Canterbury in Oxford. So we were flown to Wellington, where I had to meet with a Crown lawyer, and she explained all this, that, there's this deal on the table, and, would I accept rah-de-rah-rah? And I'm like, no, I'm not accepting that. Well, this is just an absolute joke. And the detective, Alana's, she was laughing because she said, I told the Crown lawyer, Sally, that that's what you'd say, like, you're way stronger than that, you're not going to accept that. And that basically put it, the defence had tried putting it that we had nothing, this is all in my head, and perhaps we should just agree that this isn't going to go anywhere and save all this time. And I'm like, no, that's not happening. So then the Crown, she explained to me, look, if we can get him on one charge, that pretty much is going to be the maximum penalty that he's going to get, because no matter what he does, because he's already served all this time, he's deemed as being rehabilitated, and you cannot rehabilitate the rehabilitated. So he's basically going to get maybe 5 or 7 months home D. That's the maximum you're looking at. And I was like, well, okay, this is bloody stupid. If someone had told me this 6 years ago, I don't know if I'd have gone through this journey the same. But I was like, you know what? Let's just do it. I said, at the end of the day, let's do it. And I said, I'm happy to go to trial. If that's what it takes to get that, I don't mind. Well, we'd hopped on the plane to come back down. By the time we'd got back here, he'd changed his plea to guilty. And he didn't just plead guilty to one charge, he pleaded guilty to 2 or 3 different charges, but all relating to that one incident, because that was their golden ticket that didn't need any proof or anything. He couldn't get out of that one. So when he'd been arrested, he'd spent 10 months in prison at that point before corrections couldn't hold him and they had to release him. So he was released, and then he got 7 months home D, because what happens is they take the prison time off the total sentence, which was 2 years, because it brings it under 2 years, because he'd been rehabilitated, and 50% for good behaviour and that sort of thing, a really guilty plea. It alters the sentencing, and it ended up that he has to serve 7 months home D on top of the 10 months imprisonment that he'd done, which works out I probably got more in that way than he would have ever got, but it doesn't seem a lot.
No.
But in saying that, I didn't really care about the sentencing. That side was irrelevant to me, and I'll tell you why, because I know you're beginning to know this. I got to do my victim impact statement. Now, this is something that I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to do it. when I wrote my statement, I actually did it alone. There was no one else around me. I had tears streaming down my face, and I just started writing. And it probably didn't seem to make a lot of sense at the time. And it wasn't until going back and reading it afterwards going, whoa, like this actually came out of my mouth here, and I've got this. A couple of little bits I had to change around that I kind of hadn't worded quite right or whatever, and got that sorted. And you have to be quite PC in regards to it, because otherwise, like, a judge reads it well before it gets to sentencing. And if your language is too strong, they don't accept it. So in other words, I was quite clever, and I found a way to say fuck you to him without saying those words.
Go, Todd.
Yeah. So, my wife came with me. My kids wanted to support me in court, and I said no. And I said no because this is a part of my journey that I had to do for me. And my kids have never met my birth father. So they don't know their grandfather. They never ever will, because I have protected them from him. And that was another piece of me saying, I don't want you anywhere near this mongrel. So I did that, and I remember standing there and just shaking, because this is the first time I'd seen him in years. And in my head, he was this big, strong guy. And in reality, he was this old, weak man who couldn't even look me in the eye. And when I started speaking, the judge couldn't take her focus off of me. The defense lawyer couldn't. She just sat back in her chair and didn't know what to do. And she was quite young, but I think she was a little bit shocked as to what I was saying and how I was saying it. My cousin was there. Basically, she came up and stood beside me, and I was that focused on what I was doing, I forgot she was even there. I had my wife sort of was situated on a bit of an angle, so you get the opportunity to do it behind a screen or whatever. I chose not to. I wanted to be able to do it. And if I couldn't, my cousin was going to take over reading it for me. But for me, I needed to be able to look him in the eye and tell him, I'm not afraid of you anymore. And this is what you've done. This is the effects it's had on my life. And the effects have been huge, really, really huge.
Cool. Oh, Todd. Wow.
But I tell you what, there was no greater healing for me than that moment where knowing that actually now I have the power back. You can't even look me in the eye and accept that this is the man standing in front of you is that same little boy that you did these things to.
Yeah.
But I'm not a boy anymore.
Yeah.
So that was quite freeing. And the other thing was, prior to me doing my victim impact statement, I had, when this all went through, I had personally put in an application to have my name suppression removed. Because when you speak to the police and you take this through court, automatically you are granted name suppression. Yeah. You actually have to apply to have it removed. You can't just say, hey, I don't want to be named. It has to be removed. Now, in this case, it got a little bit interesting because he's obviously a convicted pedophile. He didn't have name suppression for those cases. But then all of a sudden, that was their defense, as they were wanting to protect the victims of his prior offending, who had completely different names. I'm not going to go into that.
No.
Whereas I share the same last name as him. And, if I'm fine to have my name out there because he's already trashed it prior and he never thought about my name being affected because he'd done these things, why the hell should he be allowed to get off it like that? And I guess that was, for me, was the one thing I wanted out of it. I wasn't sure I was going to get it, because by having it removed enabled me to do what we're doing now, and to quite openly say to the judge, my main reason for doing this, is so that any other victims of his offending can come forward, because it may just trigger them enough to go, hey, he did this to me too. But it also enables me to speak out about what's gone on and what's occurred in an open and frank conversation that's so desperately needed, in the hopes that it helps someone else. Because we don't get enough of that. But that was a huge thing. And when that judge said, Ashley, no, look, the defence's argument is crap. I grant that this is name suppression is removed. There was just this massive weight come off my shoulders, and I was like,
Wow.
I can't believe I've just done this, because it was pretty bad. The Crown lawyers wouldn't even help me to do that.
No.
I had to figure it out for myself, and I was really, look, I'll give a little plug here for the victim advisors. So the victim advisors in court are there to help you as a victim to go through that journey. And outstanding, absolutely outstanding. And I was really lucky that I'd built quite a good rapport with these advisors, and they taught me through how to do this, and that was the best thing ever, because it enabled me to get that application in and get it done without expensive lawyers' bills or anything like that. And I had it removed, and now we can talk about it.
That is so powerful. And do you know, you actually handed the shame back. Well done, Todd. That's so powerful. Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left, actually. But man, what a story. Well, I guess one final question from me, and you've kind of looked at it throughout our conversation, but how can we help our fellow male survivors out there to find their voice?
I think look, even doing this as a start, being open and having open and frank conversations around this, that like I touched on a few times, is hurt people, and I know for me, my trauma affected who I'd become as a man and how I dealt with things as a man, and why I reacted certain ways to things like triggers and things, as subconsciously, not even knowing this is how I was doing things. So that's where things, I guess, need to change for all of us, is just by having these conversations helps it become a normal thing. It doesn't have to be a dirty thing. It doesn't have to be a shameful thing.
No.
You're not going to find a more blokier bloke than me, like,
no.
I'm all about manly sort of stuff. It's what I do. So there's no shame in it. There's absolutely no shame in saying, hey, this happened to me. Because you know what? We weren't the ones who dictated that that's what happens. We were little kids, and getting your head around the fact that if you're a kid and this happens to you, you're not responsible. You couldn't change it. There's nothing you could do, I carried shame, a huge shame, like I touched on. My father was already a convicted pedophile. Now, I witnessed him doing things to those particular girls as well, and that was part of my story, I guess, that when I talked to the police, was for years I struggled with the fact that I couldn't help them. I wasn't strong enough to stop them, and I carried that shame on my shoulders. It wasn't my shame to carry. It wasn't my burden to carry, but I did anyway, because that's me. And I think most people in my shoes would have done the same. And that's the reality, is we don't talk about this enough to make people realize, hey, this isn't on you. This is on us as a community. It is on us as a country, and it is on us as a world to actually talk about these things and say this isn't on.
So the shame that never belonged to us, and that's why we're handing it back. But Todd, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Stay on the line. I'll stop shortly. But for those of you out there in our audience, aren't we lucky to have had Todd join us today? And what a brave and wonderful man to come forward and bring his story into the light. Very touched by you, Todd, and it's going to help a lot of people out there. For those of you that are struggling with this and not sure of what to do, There is the Help Foundation at 09623 1700. They have people on the spot ready to listen to you and help support you. We also will be providing links under this show for where you can contact Todd if you want to have a conversation, or myself. There's some places we've got that you can potentially go to. You're not alone out there. We're there to help. We're there to support. And thank you so much for listening and being part of this. Really appreciate it.